And Dr. Pyatt and the rest of the group, welcome to our final group project. This is it for us when it comes to this class and actually for the entire course as we wrap things up here. I am Rob. Of course, Caroline is with me this evening as we cover chapters 10 and 11 from the FOBI text, and Caroline's going to start things off and chat a little bit about chapter 10.
The funny thing is, Rob, you pointed this out the other night that we started in a group for this class, you and I did, or for this program, and we're ending together. So that I liked how you pointed that out the other night. I didn't even realize it. So.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Communicating change for chapter 10. The necessity and rarity of change communication strategy, messaging models for the roles of change managers, strategies for addressing messages to various groups, and anticipating problems with message interference or noise are covered in this chapter. And I think we've all had a part of that where communication changes daily. I feel like I'm always trying to keep up with the new and most improved communication ways for my kids at school, so I can teach them to go out into the real world and be able to communicate on all kinds of levels. But Palmer, Dunford, and Atkin repeatedly return to the 5 facts model: who, what, when, why, and how. And I feel like that's been pressed in our brains over and over for years. Who, what, when, and how. I can remember learning that in second grade with my second grade teacher, writing papers, or starting to try to anyways. So who, what, when, and how, with emphasis on why and some sort of interaction of the issues of how. Now, suggestions in the text center around building both trust and buy-in through coaching and interpretation roles, while avoiding overwhelming organizations with too much information in a dictatorial approach. And I think that we all try to figure that out. How should we approach things? We are going to approach this one group of people the same way we're going to approach this other group of people. I'm not going to communicate the same way I communicate with Rob as I do with my students at school. It's different, and you have to kind of know the background when you're going in. Lack of communication is still a signal to stakeholders, and resistance may come forth, both rumor and misinterpretation, or a feel of sense-making model when the impacts of change are unknown. The tactics offered here may also be useful from a crisis management perspective. But when positive change is offered with a clear explanation in the context of shared values to stakeholders who can also participate in integration, planning through feedback, and whose input is valued, a buy-in is possible that may not only avoid resistance but improve implementation. The function of defensiveness is to lower trust receivers. If a message is clear and the organization can align itself to improve the conditions that are clearly understood, then this position can be avoided. Often, the result of either over communication or lack of communication is the defensive communicator may already lost his audience. So you never really truly know where you're at with communication, is what I got from it. It depends on your audience wholeheartedly.
Well, and I love these chapters. I mean, we've talked through the last 2 years about communication is kind of my thing. I enjoy communication. I mean, it's what I do. I've taught some communication classes, and of course in radio for the last 30 years. Communication is what I do. So it's kind of a thing I have a passion for. And chapter 11 also focuses on communication, and it talks a little bit about how each of the different kinds of leaders communicate a little differently. Like the director likes to tell people what's going on.
That's definitely me.
Yeah. When it comes to the navigator, he likes to talk, or she likes to talk about the nature of the change and why we're changing, while the caretaker focuses on the why of the change. The coach ensures that people have the similar values, and then they're aware of what is appropriate with these values. And the interpreter does exactly that, kind of interprets the change for the staff, while the nurturer lets everybody know everything and lets them know it's going to be okay. As we get through, the nurturer just says, yeah, but it'll be fine. When we get to the end, it'll be okay. So that's kind of the different approaches to this kind of communication when talking about change. Fabi in the text goes on to talk about how communicating with the outside is also important when it comes to change. And I have found this particularly when it comes to my work with the school district. As most of you know, my cohort knows anyway, I sit on school board. And when we do any kind of change, and I think it's particularly important when you work as an elected official, when you're working with people's taxpayer dollars, if you're going to change something, you need to tell them why. So having that communication externally as well as internally is a good thing, so that you can let them know. Fabi touches on some good ways to communicate that change. One of the big ways, and one of the biggest parts of communication that we tend to forget, is listening. You need to listen. You need to hear what other people are saying for effective communication. And that's one of the things that we tend to forget. When I teach Intro to Comm classes here at Olivet, that's one of the things we teach them in speech class. Being an effective communicator is being a good listener. Another thing that you need to learn, especially if you're going to be talking to people who are outside of your little group, so doing this kind of external thing, tell a good story. You need to learn how to tell a story. And Chase, I just read a piece of information here recently that said one of the things women like is a guy that can tell a good story. So for Chase, that's, as you're getting ready to move out and, get married and whatnot, might be something you want to think about. And then lastly, he talks about selling that change upward. So going to the people above and having lower level people actually talking up that channel. One of the great things, it was kind of a little sidelight that Fabi touched on in chapter 11, didn't really spend a lot of time with it, was the idea of toxic handlers when it comes to change. He points out, and I think we all have probably had this happen at one time or another, where change in an organization can actually be toxic. It can cause undertones of toxicity where people get dissatisfied and there's grumbling and there's all these things. And one of the sections of chapter 11 talks about these toxic handlers, who are people who are being a part of the change. They're out in the group as well as anybody else, but they shoulder some of that weight to carry that toxicity, to help with those toxic people. And I found that really interesting, that whole idea of a toxic handler. Then finally, Fabi in the text talks about these conversation skills that are needed when it comes to change. And he points out conversations for understanding. So making sure that the language explains what is expected of the organization and what's expected of the change and what successful change is going to look like. So those are those conversations of understanding when you start change. Conversations of performance that kind of focus on what needs to happen to make the change happen. Those conversations talk about who's going to do what. And then one of the things that I have found in my experience anyway tend to be ignored is those conversations on closure. How at the end of change, once things have been done successfully, we need to have those conversations to celebrate the change, to celebrate where we were, where we've come from, the difficulties we've gone through, and just celebrate that we've made it. So as we talk about conversations, what's that, Caroline?
Rob, I think closure is important when change doesn't work as well. I think that, reflecting on that, where did we go wrong? What did we do wrong? How can we fix this, and how can we move on as an organization or as a group? I think that that's important as well when it's just not successful, because change isn't always successful.
Yeah. Yeah, and certainly taking a look at what went wrong and what can we do different next time to try and make it work. It's not a bad idea. So there you go. That's those are chapters 10 and 11 from the Fabi text. Caroline, anything you wanted to add before we sign off?
No, I just wish our school board would communicate with our teachers a little more. So just remember that, Rob, when you're making a change and you don't consult the teachers, ultimately you're messing with their livelihood as well. So
That's true.
yeah, yeah, we butt heads a lot with our school board. I probably shouldn't say that online YouTube, but it is what it is.
Yeah, somebody could see it, I suppose, but they'd have to go looking.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and I'm going to wrap things up, and I'm going to take just a couple of minutes here and thank everybody. It's been 2 years, guys, and we're almost done. So
we've made it. We really have. We've got these 2 weeks left, and we're golden. We're ready to bring it in.
Yeah. So
home run.
Caroline and Felicia and Marcy have been with us all along, and Chase, who's been kind of off and on with us through the last couple of years. Thanks, guys, for all your hard work. Thanks for all the things that we've accomplished, and thank you, Dr. Pyatt, for being helpful with us in this last class, trying to make it at least so that it's not something that we should have done before our capstone. Go figure. So thanks, guys, and we'll see you some other time.